Welcome to our session about educating for American democracy, a very important project, and we're so thankful that you're joining us today. I am Louise Dubé, and I am the Executive Director of iCivics, and I also lead the Civics Now Coalition. I'm here with my colleagues, Danielle Allen, who is the James Bryant Conant University Professor at Harvard, as well as the Director of Harvard's Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics, as well as Paul Carisse, who is the founding director of the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University. The three of us, along with Jane Kamensky from Harvard, Peter Levine and Kei Kawashima Ginsburg from Tufts, as well as Tammy Waller from the Arizona Department of Education, have been working for almost 2 years on this project, the Educating for American Democracy project, which issues national guidance about how to teach and what to teach in history and civics for civic development. I can't think of a more important project at this time in our nation, and I'm really glad that we have a little time to explore this project. So here's what we're going to do today. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of how this project, what this project is, and then we will turn to a conversation with Danielle and Paul about what this project means and why it's so important and how it came together. So with that, let's get started. So first of all, who's involved? Over 300 scholars, experts in their discipline, as well as a lot of educators and students have participated in this project to issue this national guidance. It was funded by the National Endowments for the Humanities, as well as the US Department of Education, and we're deeply grateful for their support. So what is it? When you look at our standards, oftentimes you see a series of facts, and that is what educators are asked to teach in history and civics. This project, the Educating for American Democracy Roadmap, is really asking, why don't we lay out some very important questions so that we build students' knowledge and capacities to sustain our constitutional democracy. The Educating for American Democracy is a set of guidance about what and how to teach history and civics. What that means is instead of listing individual events in our history and our present, we ask big, broad questions that seek to have more depth and students to learn more, not less. We also have a series of pedagogies about how to teach history and civics for excellence. It's also important to note what it is not. It's not a national curriculum, and it's not a mandate. It can be used by teachers, individual teachers, schools, districts, or states to design instructional standards. On the content side, oftentimes our content is organized to explain what is an exceptional nation of achievement. Sometimes it's also structured to talk about the failures of our nation. Educating for American Democracy really asks to do both at the same time, to tell America's plural yet shared story, both the good and the bad. Our content is organized in 7 themes in 4 grade bands, and in each of those, we teach history with civics in an integrated way. Just to give you a better sense of what this might look like, on the left-hand side of this slide, you'll see a series of historical events. So the French and Indian War, the Stamp Act, the Boston Tea Party. Most likely, your state standards would have those events listed. Instead, in the Educating for American Democracy roadmap, you would see questions such as, Why did some colonists choose to become an independent nation while others remained loyal to Britain? What were the experiences with the British government of British colonists, indigenous Americans, enslaved Americans, and indentured Americans? So asking to look at the other's perspective on these events. This is just a look at what an extract from the roadmap might look like. You would see this is our theme 3, We the People. It starts with an explanation of the theme. This theme explores the idea of the people as a political concept, not just a group of people who share a physical landscape, but also a group of people who share political ideals and institutions. And under that theme would be history thematic questions and civics thematic questions, and under those would be driving questions. So that's what you would get. Another very important part of our content roadmap is this idea that educators struggle with these fundamental tensions in history and civics education that we wanted to lift up and make explicit. So we have 5 of those. This is design challenge number 5. And I think it would feel very natural to many of educators. So this one asks, how can we support educators in helping students move between concrete narrative and chronological learning and thematic and abstract conceptual learning? With that, what are our goals? Our goals are very ambitious. We would like by 2030, our goal is to have 60 million students be exposed and have access to high quality civic learning opportunities. That essentially means everybody. But we understand that students are not by themselves going to achieve that. They need support from educators, from families, from states, and that means we need 100,000 schools to be civic ready. So to make this a priority, so we're all rowing in the same direction. With that, I'm going to turn to my colleagues, Danielle and Paul, and talk to them about why this project, why now, and what's so important about it. So with that, let me turn to Danielle first and ask her, how did you decide that educating for American democracy was needed, and what prompted you to get involved?
It's amazing the smallest moments can lead to the biggest projects. So for me, this work actually started at an end of year tea party with my academic colleagues, where I was standing with some economists and mathematicians, and then there were people in the humanities and social sciences like myself. My specialties are history and political science. Those of us in the humanities and social sciences were standing around talking about how difficult we found teaching these days, that we were finding students coming not very well prepared to deal with the historical concepts, the texts, and so forth that were critical to the kind of understanding of democracy we were working on. And my mathematician and economist colleague said, "Are you kidding? Our students are coming in as well prepared as we've ever seen them." And the light bulb went off for me at that moment, that our many decades of investment in STEM education have worked. It's paid off. And the accompanying disinvestment in civics learning and history has also resulted in something. And so at that moment, I knew that for the civic strength of this country, we really need to work on reinvesting in history and civic learning so that young people understand our society, they know how to be effective actors within it, and most importantly, also have the tools and skills and motivation to bridge differences and division and cleavage that are currently disabling our society.
Well, thank you. I actually learned something after 2 years. That's amazing. So I appreciate that. And then I'm going to turn to Paul. How did you meet Danielle? And tell us a lot about this project is about civic friendship. This is a very crossy ideological project. So tell us about that and maybe a little bit about reflective patriotism and why that's important to you.
Well, thank you, Louise, and thank you, Danielle. Thank you to South by Southwest for this. I knew of Danielle because she's a very prominent scholar in political philosophy, political thought, American political thought. Those are generally my fields. So I think I knew about her a long time before she ever knew about me. And then to be perfectly honest, to tell our viewers, the two of you reached out to me. You're in the Northeast, which is where I was born and raised and was a graduate student. But I'm now in flyover country in the Southwest and at a state university, and I'm an intellectual conservative. And the two of you realize that in this moment for America, for American civic education, precisely what was needed, among other qualities, for a national study was an attempt at a national consensus, cross-philosophical understanding of the essential approaches to learning, engagement, to prepare citizens, informed, engaged citizens, members of our political community. So I had recently had Danielle out here to our school at Arizona State University, our department, to speak, and got to know her better. And then the opportunity came to join this study. And yes, since you mentioned civic friendship, I have become intellectual friends and working partners with you and our other lead members in the EAD study. But what brought us all together was, even before we started talking about the word, is this idea of civic friendship across party views, philosophical views, life experiences, that this is what a free people do. We disagree about everything, but we also share certain principles and a certain history. And again, we want to argue about that, but we can be friends, civic friends, across all of those divergences.
Those civic friendships right now feel very dangerous in many cases, and we're a very polarized nation. So how have you seen both the civic friendship and the tension surface throughout this project? Danielle, do you want to address that? And then Paul, maybe?
Sure. Maybe I'll give examples at different ends of the spectrum. So things that we wrestled with, one of which we were able to come to agreement on, and the other of which we decided to take the wrestling and turn it into a design challenge that we could offer to the whole country. So one of our first jobs was to figure out what the work was about. As we think about delivering excellence in history and civic learning, what's the goal? We found ourselves arguing about whether or not the goal was to support a democracy or to support a republic. And of course, each of those words is valorized by different ends of our political spectrum. The concept of democracy captures the idea of popular involvement, popular sovereignty, ordinary people helping to shape our shared life. The concept of a republic captures the idea of order and structure and institutional hierarchy to some extent that anchors the rule of law. So we had a real debate. What were we going to call what we were doing? And we settled on a compromise of constitutional democracy as being what we would be working on behalf of. That captured the commitment to the participation of ordinary people, of the democracy term, but also the commitment to order and structure and rule of law, captured by the idea of a republic. So that was a really important compromise that we started with. Another thing that we wrestled with continuously was the question of how to find the right balance of being clear-eyed about the wrongs in our history, the crimes and the failures to do right by others, issues of enslavement, issues of indigenous removal, and so forth. At the same time, we also want to be clear-eyed and appreciative about the goods, the Constitution, the constitutionalism that flows from that, the way that opens up possibilities for a free and equal self-governing people. So we decided it's not our job to answer the question up front, how to achieve that narration that combines both of those perspectives, but it is a design challenge facing the whole country. How can we tell our story, our history, in ways that are simultaneously honest about our wrongs, but without tipping into cynicism, and that are also appreciative of the founding without tipping into adulation? We have to work between those guardrails.
And Paul, maybe you could address a little bit just about the Civic Trust and how you build it.
Yes, and you mentioned this phrase, reflective patriotism, that we also decided to use. And like everything else, we argued about it and discussed it, and then we shopped it out, farmed it out, and got response from various experts and panels and educators. And that's another one of these concepts that has multiple meanings. We decided we should put forward for teachers and for students and for communities the idea that patriotism is an important concept for citizens, full members of a free political community, but with the important dimension of reflective patriotism. So patriotism is not a bad word. It's not a narrow-minded word, especially in this phrase, reflective patriotism, that free people will argue and disagree about the meaning of the very fundamental principles that bring us together, the laws, the Constitution, our history. And so we love America. We're grateful for America. We also are critical of America, of its history. We disagree about just what the principles mean, as Danielle was just saying, democracy, republic, what do these terms mean? How do you fit them together? And our hope in the curriculum that will be decided by local educators and states, right? We gave a framework here of questions, but our hope is that the curricula that are developed will bake into the learning process this idea that disagreement can build civic community and civic trust. If we share a set of important questions, important ideas, important arguments, important disagreements, we can learn to be civic friends, can be learning school, intellectual community friends. That those are not. It's a paradox. It's difficult to hold all these things together. They're not contradictory. And then just while I'm droning on, all of this is connected to an extraordinary moment in American history of a degree of division, anger, misunderstanding, extremes of either ferociously angry engagement or complete disengagement, disgust with politics. So we were trying to model in the study, with a small leadership group spreading out to various task force and national feedback and all that. We were trying to model the very ideas and approach to citizenship, education, and lifelong learning that we're asking people to consider.
Yeah, that's very important. Danielle, why is it so important to do this now?
Exactly what Paul just pointed to. We have this terrible disaffection with our society, our way of life. For me, the starkest data point capturing that is the statistic that for people born before World War II, 70% of the members of that generational cohort consider it essential to live in a democracy. For people who are 40 and under, barely 30% consider it essential to live in a democracy. That means we're currently failing at a process of generational succession, passing on the inheritance of our constitutional democracy. From my point of view, because I believe that human flourishing flows from free and equal self-government, it's just imperative that we rebuild that commitment of our rising generations to constitutional democracy.
And Paul, this is an ambitious project. Why does it need to be so ambitious? Why is that the right thing to do right now?
Well, the disinvestment that you have talked about, that Danielle has talked about, whether accidental or intentional, has had an effect. The degree of polarization and division and then dysfunction, not able to make policies at state level, local level, national level, not to be able to address important realities. That is a consequence of losing a political culture grounded in political, civic, and historical knowledge, in which we understand the importance of being engaged across differences, engaged despite difficulties, engaged in a way that's inclusive of people, and that means including the failings of American history and failure to live up to principles, as well as celebrating extraordinary achievements. So and I will say one reason for the disinvestment is within political science, my discipline, history, related disciplines. At the university level with scholars, we have had such strong disagreements about what the important principles are, about what to teach, that's been reflected in just schools of education, others just wanting to, turn away from this. It's so controversial. It's so divisive. There's not a national set of standards or guidelines. So it's easier to just turn toward STEM or toward reading or language arts or other things, because the degree of controversy and division is so strong. So we have made an effort to provide a model for how to address that set of issues, to provide guidance, to urge people, but also provide support to state and local leaders and educators to tackle these very large challenges. And I'll just finish, self-government is hard. It's always been hard. And education is hard. It's always been hard. We have a lot of work to do, but Americans can do it. We've faced challenges and overcome challenges before.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Instead of turning away, we need to lean in, it sounds like. So appreciate that. So let's turn to the nuts and bolts here. Danielle, how this is ambitious, it's guidelines. How is this going to turn into action? How will this get into the classroom? And what are educators supposed to do?
It is ambitious. It is a project of collaborative federalism. It requires effort at all layers of our set of political institutions. So we need schools to develop civic learning plans, local educational agencies to do that. That really needs to be supported by states. States should be asking schools to do this. States should also be providing support for professional development for educators. And we need the national government to invest in research, help us track data. We need to actually administer the NEP exam on a regular basis and then make that data available to states for continuous learning. We also need civil society organizations nationally, nonprofits, schools of education, universities. All of those kinds of organizations in our national civil society need to start really building out a massive treasury of resources, curricula and learning plans and lesson plans and so forth. So we're starting to compile all of that, curate a website. Hopefully it will grow over time, over the coming decade. I mean, this is truly at least a decades-long project, if not several decades. And so at every level, there's work to do. Educators can get started by diving into the roadmap, thinking about its inquiry-based approach to teaching, and looking at the questions for the grade band that you're in, and really asking the question of, are there places I'm already addressing these questions? Great. If so, how can I strengthen that part of what I already do? Are there questions here that I wish I were addressing? Okay. If so, let's have a professional development workshop and think about how to pull those questions, that exploration, into the curriculum. We can really start at a micro level, even while we build out to a huge impact.
Thank you so much. Yeah, there is so much opportunity. The beauty of Educating for American Democracy project, I think, is its flexibility that can be used by a teacher, an educator, a school, a district, and so on, and really shaped to the local conditions. So that is a beautiful example of federalism. So with that, we are running down on our time. Paul, I just want to ask you a question about, there's such division in this country, and many people are feeling hopeless, and many people have talked about the need for civic education. Why are you hopeful at this time based on Educating for American Democracy?
Well, as I mentioned, America has faced extraordinary challenges before. In my lifetime and before, one motivation has been external challenges. So, the Sputnik moment, and we're a concern about economic competitiveness globally in the 1980s. This is an older challenge that the framers of our country knew about. Lincoln talked about it in the 1830s, that America would fail almost by suicide or because of internal problems, not because of external threats. But we have made enormous achievements and progress in American society, in American politics, in civic life, in education, in my lifetime and before. I was born in the 1960s. And I see no reason we can't make the effort that Danielle was just sketching. We can't rediscover these civic virtues, civic friendship and civil disagreement and reflective patriotism, and commit to the effort that's needed. We've done it before. We should be able to do it again.
Thank you. Danielle, you want to help end us on a hopeful note as well?
Well, for me, it was a true joy to work with this incredible community of scholars and educators and learn how to tell complete stories of American history, how to put different perspectives on our events and our key concepts into relationship with each other. That relational focus in our work and in the content gives me hope. It helps me believe we can rebuild healthy relationships for ourselves as a society.
With
Hear,
that,
hear.
it will conclude our program. And thank you so much, Danielle and Paul. And thank you for your scholarship and for your leading into this important project. And to all educators out there, please take a look. Thank you.